Welcome to your first demo of OnShape. In this first demo here, we are going to create our first drawing, and we're going to try a few different drawing tools, and our end product is going to be this really cool Pennsylvania license plate keychain. So this will be our first sketch, and then we'll learn how to extrude this to make it into an actual keychain. But we have to start with that two-dimensional sketch first. That's what we're going to work on in today's demo. So go ahead and open up OnShape. You should already know how to do that. And once you have your OnShape open, you're not going to see any of these objects here, especially if you've just created your account and you've never used it before. But the first thing we're going to do to create a new document is to click on Create and then Document. Now, the naming is extremely important. Extremely important when you're naming OnShape documents, because when you submit them to me, you're really just sharing them with me. And if you don't follow the correct format and the naming, then it's going to get lost in my inbox or all of my shared files. So the way you need to do this, and it needs to be at every single time, you need to start with your class name. After you enter your class name, the next thing you do is an underscore and then the assignment name. So for this assignment, it's going to be called Demo 1. And then the final thing that you do is you put your last name. So if I were doing it for this assignment, and I were in, let's say I was in the class called Tesla, I would go Tesla underscore the assignment name, Demo 1 underscore last name. Okay, and you would put your own last name here, you would put your own class here. So the only thing that should be the same on your document is this Demo 1. Okay, so once you have that named correctly, if this is not what it looks like at the top here, if you do not have your class name, the assignment name, and then your last name, you need to change that right now. If you do not submit that correctly, you won't get credit. Alright, so now we can see that we're in this workspace, and we should be somewhat familiar with this. We looked at some of the objects that were on that first quiz last week. So if you can see, we have some different surfaces here. So these are your top planes, your front planes, and your right planes. Remember, when we were doing our orthographic sketching, we took views from the top, the front, and the right. So when we're actually creating our objects, we're going to start with sketches on the top, the front, or the right. And so for this particular drawing today, because we are going to be kind of just starting out, we're actually going to be drawing on our top surface. So remember, if we click on the little cube up here, that'll actually snap right to the top surface. And then from here, if we want to hide some of these other planes, because we're not going to need the front or the right today, we're just doing a two-dimensional sketch, we can click on the little eyeball here, and that'll hide the front plane. And then if we click on this little eyeball here, that'll hide the right plane. So now all we can see is this top surface, and this top surface is what we're going to be writing or drawing on today. If you remembered the click wheel on your mouse, that'll allow you to zoom in and zoom out, but it does it from where your cursor is. So if you want to zoom in right in the middle, make sure your cursor's hovered over the middle, and then you can roll your click wheel forward to zoom in and backward to zoom out. Okay, so that's enough with navigating the plane. Let's actually go in and create our first sketch. So to create the first sketch, we're going to click on the sketch button. The shortcut for doing that is holding Shift and then pressing the S key. I'm going to give you the shortcuts. Eventually, you're probably going to want to switch to them. It just makes things a lot quicker. All right, now notice after we click on that sketch, we get this little notification that says select a sketch plane. So that's asking us what surface are we trying to sketch on. In this case, we know that it's the top surface. So we click on the top surface, and you should see that in this little box right here for sketch 1, our sketch plane is the top plane. Now, this little box can be moved around. When you're finished with your sketch, and only when you're finished with your sketch, you'll click on that green checkbox. So move that thing out of the way, move it way out of the way. We will be clicking that green checkbox once we finish the sketch. Okay, so we are making a license plate, which obviously is a rectangle. So we're going to start by using our center point rectangle tool. So if you hover over this rectangle, you can see it says corner rectangle. If we click on the drop down arrow, you can see that there's an option for center point rectangle. That's the one that we're going to be using. The only difference between the two is where the rectangle actually starts. So the center point rectangle will start in the center and then kind of build out from there. A corner rectangle will start in a corner and then build down from there. So we'll choose the center point rectangle. A shortcut for that would be pressing the letter R. So if I wanted to do this really quickly, I could press R, and that would jump right to my center point rectangle tool. Okay, so let's go ahead and make that. We're going to start our center point rectangle on the origin. And notice as I get close to the origin, these little yellow lines pop up. These are called automatic constraints, and we're going to deal with those a little bit later on. But we do want to actually constrain this rectangle to have a center point at the origin. That'll make our license plate centered right in the middle of our document. So once we see that little yellow box pop up, we can click one time and then move it out. We're going to change the dimensions on this, so it doesn't really matter what you do right away. Because again, the first thing we're going to do is change the sizes. So notice how we still have the center point rectangle tool selected. To unselect any tool, we press Escape, and that'll get you off. So now you can choose a new tool, or you can select a piece of your drawing. But in our case here, we want to actually put some dimensions on this rectangle. So we want to give it some certain sizes. So the way to do that is by clicking the dimension tool. And again, there's a shortcut there. If you press the letter D on your keyboard, it will do the same thing as clicking on that tool. So a little shortcut, press the letter D. We got the dimensioning tool down. And now we can actually give our rectangle or our little license plate keychain here a width and a height. So we're going to give the width of this keychain 100 millimeters. And as long as you change your default units, your document should already be set to millimeters and you don't have to change anything. If you have it in inches, then you're going to have to change that. To do that, you have to go to the document settings. Okay. Now, if we wanted 100 millimeters width, so that's 10 centimeters. So that's 1 centimeter is like the width of your pinky. So if you think about it, like 100 millimeters, that's 10 centimeters. So that's 10 widths of the pinky. So you're looking at like, you know, a drawing or a little keychain that's like that wide. And then if we want to do the height, we can do that as well. So make that 50. And now we've set our width and our height. And remember, because this is a rectangle, the opposite side is 50 and this opposite side is 100. All right. So that was the first sketch tool that we're using. That is the center point rectangle. Remember, the shortcut for that is R. And then how we put these measurements on there, we use the dimension tool where we press the letter D. Okay. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually smooth the corners of this rectangle. And that tool is called the fillet tool. So you can see up here it says sketch fillet. So to do a shortcut there, it would be Shift S, or you can just click on the tool itself, either way. And what these do is they smooth off the corner of any rectangular shape or any corner that you have. So all we need to do is just select all of our corners that we want to round off. Make sure you do them all at the same time, because when we have these all selected, then this radius that we're doing, so this smoothing, it applies to all of the corners, not just one of them. Okay? Now, you can move this radius in, you can move it out if you want it to be more smooth or less smooth. We're actually going to set it to be 5. So when you click outside, you can change this measurement, this radius, to be 5, and that's what we want. Okay, now, let's say I wanted to make it maybe a little bit bigger. So instead of making it 5, I wanted to make it 7. Just like when we were in vector, to undo anything, all you do is press Control-Z, and that'll undo it. Okay, so if I want to go back in and change this width back to 5, I can do that. If I wanted to undo it, Control-Z is to undo. All right, so we've got our rectangle and we've got it smoothed out using our fillet tool. So the next thing we want to do is we want to give this license plate a little bit of a ridge. So we want a second border around this outside. And there's a really cool tool called the offset tool that actually just copies any feature and just moves it in or out a certain distance. So if I click on offset, or on my keyboard I press the letter O, and then I go and I choose all of my segments around this outside that make up the outside, you'll see that it'll give me a exact copy of the outside. It'll just move it a little bit in. So let's try it out. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 components. And notice how on the inside here, I now have this little rectangle. If I move this radius in, it'll move that offset distance in. If I move it up, it'll move that offset distance up. So what we're going to do is we're going to click out here, and we're going to set this distance to be 2 millimeters. All right, so 2 millimeters offset distance, that's what we're looking for there. So the next thing that we're going to do then is we're actually going to put some text on this license plate. So we saw that we had the Pennsylvania going across, and then we also had our license plate letters, so the Too Fast For You. So to get the text on this license plate, what we're going to do is we're going to choose the text tool. There is no shortcut for the text tool, so you just have to use text. And then we can click and drag to the approximate space that we want it to be. And notice there are some of those automatic constraints popping up. Make sure that you move it out of the way. You do not want this text box to have an auto constraint on it. Okay, so what are we going to do next? Well, we're going to put the text that we want to put on the license plate. So at the top, we wanted the state, so Pennsylvania. And then we can confirm that. So notice how this isn't really in the center. It's not really kind of anywhere. It just showed up on our license plate. So if you click on either the center bar or the bottom bar, you can actually move it around. So if we want to move it around, we can click on the center bar. If we want to move it side to side, we can click on the bottom bar. But we're going to want to lock this in, and we want to lock it in to the center of this license plate. So to lock this in to the exact center of the license plate, what we're going to do is we're actually going to constrain, or we're going to lock in this Pennsylvania word into the center. So right now it can move anywhere, but we're going to use a constraint, which remember is a limiting factor, which limits the position where it could be, to this piece of the text, and it'll lock it in place. So the constraint we want to choose is the vertical constraint, because we want this dot right here, this point, to be like vertical, so right above, vertically, the center point here. So to do that, we just choose those two different points, the center of our text, the center of our document, and look at that. It moves it right into place, and it's locked in. So if I press Escape to get out of my tools, you can notice that I can no longer move this thing side to side. So if I try to move it side to side, it doesn't work. But if I click on the bottom, I can move it up and down. Okay, so we only locked it in vertically, we didn't lock it in horizontally. And so what we'll do then is we'll put some dimensions just on the height so everyone's looks the same. So again, to go to dimension, you press the D on the keyboard, and then we can make this height. We'll make it an even 8 millimeters, so that'll make it a little bit bigger. And then we're going to take this bottom, and we're going to take this bottom distance, and we're going to make it a certain distance away from our edge. So we know that if our Pennsylvania letters are 8 millimeters tall, we want them to be just a little bit further from the edge, maybe 2 millimeters. So if we make this 10, we'll know that the letters will be 2 millimeters away from this edge. So the space between here is 2 millimeters because the letters themselves are 8, and the full distance between the bottom of the letters and this edge are 10. Okay, so we have that first text in there, and that looks great. So you should have seen some of the different constraints. Remember, when you see these little lines pop up, those auto constraints, okay? So those are things that are the same thing as what we just put in on purpose. They just come up automatically. And there's going to be times when you don't want those constraints to show up. So I'm going to show you an example of that here in just 1 second. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do on this license plate is we're going to create that little tree on the left side. And so if you think about it, trees are symmetric, which means that they are mirror images of themselves. So what we can do is we can start with a construction line, and then we can mirror one half of the tree over the other. So to start with a construction line, we're going to go ahead and choose the line, but then we're also going to choose this construction. So the shortcut would be pressing L and then Q for construction. And then we're going to want that construction line. So a construction line is just a line that's used for reference. It's not actually going to show up in our design, and we're actually going to end up deleting it after we use it for the reference. But we want to put it right where we want the middle of the tree to be. So we want the middle of the tree to be over here. So we'll go ahead and make this vertical construction line. Notice how there's an automatic constraint popping up on the screen. That's the perpendicular constraint, which means that we're going to have a right angle between this and this construction line, which is exactly what we want. We want it to be straight up and down. So make sure you have that vertical constraint, or the perpendicular constraint. Okay, so now you can see that it wants us to choose another point. Remember, once we're done with the tool, we press escape, and that gets us out of the tool. So escape to get you out of the tool. And then we're going to go ahead and build our tree. So this is where some of your automatic constraints might get in the way, and you might want to hide them. So I'm going to show you how to do that. We'll start by being on the line. This automatic constraint that you can see popping up right now, that is the coincident constraint, which means that that line and that point are going to be touching at all points, at all times. So if we click here, we know that it's going to be touching there. Then I'll go out a little bit for the trunk. We'll go up. And then we'll go out down here for our first branch. And then we'll come back in. And now you can see all of these different automatic constraints are popping up. So the one that we want this next point to be vertical from the first point on our tree. So you can see that the automatic constraint popped up. Perfect, that's good. And we can go down. Now I don't want to go out as far, and you can see that these automatic constraints are popping up and kind of getting in the way. So if you want to hide an automatic constraint, you hold the shift key. Hold the shift, and now you can see that there's no automatic constraints popping up at all. I can go out and make the second part of my tree in peace. Go back and use that vertical constraint that I used before. Then I'll go down one more time, holding shift to hide any of my automatic constraints. And I'll finish the tree with a coincident constraint at the very top. And then I'm done with my tool now that I've done half, so I press escape to get out of it. Okay, so I've got half of a tree, and like I said, we don't need to do the full tree because trees are symmetric, so we just need to make half of it and then mirror it over this line. So the mirror tool is right up here. You click on the mirror tool, you have to first select the mirror line. So we're going to choose the mirror line, and then we're going to choose the entities to be mirrored. So we have to choose all of those line segments that we drew to make sure that they get mirrored over that line. And then, once we're done, again we press escape. You can see that now we can delete the construction line, and if we look, we're left with a beautiful pine tree. Okay, so we're going to do one more example of putting some text down, and that text is going to be for the license plate itself. So if you remember before when we were trying to get this text, we just clicked on the text tool, we clicked and we dragged the space that we want, and then I'm going to do the old classic Fast and the Furious, too fast for you. All right, now, whoa, that text is way too big. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to put some dimensions on this width. So remember, the dimension tool, it's up here. You can either click that or you can use the letter D. And then if we want to dimension this, whoa, 136. Our license plate is only 100 millimeters long. We also have, this little tree here. So let's start with making it 70 and see where that goes. Oh, that fits a lot better. Now, this isn't in the exact center, so escape. I can click and I can move it around, horizontal, move it a little bit vertical to get it right where I want it to be. I think that's pretty good. So remember, dimension is the D. You have to dimension this length so that we can set it to make sure that the text fits on our license plate. Okay. So we are almost finished here. We have, our Pennsylvania, we got our tree, we've got our Too Fast for You. So the last thing that we need is the little keychain holder. So, what's going to actually be able to put this on our keychain. So we're going to do a little hole in this top left corner. We left the space here for a hole. So to do that, we're just going to create a circle. there's 2 different circles, just like when we had a couple different, sorry, there's actually 3 different circles, just like we had the different rectangles, but we're going to be using the center point circle. So the shortcut for that is the letter C on your keyboard. And we're going to be doing this circle with the same center, so it's coincident with this top left little circle here that was the center of the radius for our fillets. So we'll click here, and then we'll make it a size. And it doesn't matter if you don't get this right the first time, because we're going to go in and dimension, so D on your keyboard. Click on that circle, and we want to make it 4 millimeters. So we should have a little hole right there, and again, that's where we put our keychain through if we actually had some keys that we want to put this on. So now that we're finished with everything that we're going to be doing here, the next thing we need to do is we need to confirm the sketch. So click on the green box to confirm. And now that we've confirmed it, we're all finished with this sketch plan. So we can move around, we can see what we created. This is just 2-dimensional, so it hasn't been extruded into the 3rd dimension. We couldn't 3D print any of this, but we are getting very close to the point where we will be able to do that. So when you have this, and this is all finished for you, what you need to do to turn this in, and this is very important, you need to first make sure that you have the right naming convention. So it should be your class name. It should be then the assignment name, which is Demo 1, and then it should be your last name. So if you do not have your naming convention like this, class name, Demo 1, your last name, do not share it with me. You will not get credit for it. You need to have this named correctly before you actually go and you share this, and then you need to put my email in. So my email is amesewicz@crphs.org. Add me, and then once you've added me, give me editing privileges, go ahead and share that, and then you'll be good to go. If you have any questions, go ahead and send me an email. If not, I'll see you guys in our next class.